Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heart lines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and author of the newly released book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. You can visit our website, ignitinganation.com, click on the book, and just give us your name and email address, and you can read the first chapter for free. We're delighted this morning to have as our guest Chris Fabry, best-selling author of War Room, and talking to us about his new novel, Under a Cloudless Sky. Francine Rivers says this is a captivating book from page one. Chris Fabry is an award-winning author and radio personality who hosts the daily program Chris Fabry Live on Moody Radio. He's also heard on Love Worth Finding, Building Relationships with Dr. Gary Chapman, and other radio programs. A 1982 graduate of the W. Page Pitt School of Journalism at Marshall University and a native of West Virginia, Chris and his wife Andrea now live in Arizona and are the parents of 9 children. Chris's novels, which include Dogwood, Junebug, Almost Heaven, Not in the Heart, Borders of the Heart, Every Waking Moment, The Promise of Jesse Woods, Looking Into You, and his latest release, Under a Cloudless Sky, have won 5 Christie Awards, an ECPA Christian Book Award, and 2 Christianity Today Book Awards of Merit, but it's his lyrical prose and tales of redemption that keep readers returning for more. Chris has also published more than 70 other books ranging from nonfiction and film novelizations, including the recent bestseller War Room, to novels for children and young adults. He co-authored the Left Behind the Kids series with Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye, as well as the Red Rock Mysteries and Wormling series with Jerry Jenkins. RPM is his latest series for kids and explores the exciting world of NASCAR. Chris Fabry, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Eric, Rabbi, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Chris, how does it feel to be such an underachiever?
When you were reading all that, it's like, who is he talking about? And I wonder if, it's all these books that I've written or radio programs I've done or the 9 children that really define me. But it keeps me off the street.
It's interesting. I have a couple of nonfiction books and I have 1 novel that I wrote. And in writing that novel, it was as if I received a download. The whole thing, the entire book, was actually almost just given to me. It was nothing that was anything in my wheelhouse, had nothing to do with anything that I had ever really focused on before. But I found that the medium of fiction was a social tool to reach an audience with a message that they might not receive through the pulpit, through the radio, through television, but in their quiet time. And you seem to have found a real rhythm in doing this. When did you first feel the call?
I think it goes back to when I was a kid and when I read stories myself or had I had a mom who read to me. I think that's one of the greatest treasures you can have, is to have a mother who sits you down or a dad who sits you down and you smell the coffee on their breath and you read this tale that's in front of you. Walt Wangren talks about that a lot in his writing, about how his kids would sit on his lap and you look at this thing that's not either one of you, it's outside of you and you're looking into it. And when you read a good story, I really believe it looks into you. You're looking at in a mirror, in a sense. A good story will come around the back door of your heart and knock in ways that maybe a sermon or a message or a nonfiction book can't do, because it's very much emotionally oriented. So I think it's when I was a kid, when I started reading books myself and getting into those stories, how they captivated me, how they made me want to participate in that story, that I first got the idea that, well, maybe I can do this. And it's been a long road, to get to where I am today, where I can actually see this people can read my stories, because most of the time they weren't, nobody wanted to read them other than the English teacher, and even they didn't want to.
Right.
But I think it goes back to what happened with David when the prophet Nathan came to him. I always go back to this because Nathan tells him this story. It pricks David's heart. He can't believe that any landowner would be so mean as to take this little lamb and sacrifice it, make it into a meal for a person traveling. And he, jumps up with all the righteous indignation in his heart and says, he's got to pay. And Nathan says, "You are the man." That's what I hope all of my stories that I tell on the radio or that I write, that's what I hope they do in somebody's heart, that they'll reach around behind them and say, stop pointing your finger at others, out there. Let's look inside here and what God's doing.
Now, you grew up in West Virginia.
That's right.
West Virginia is known, I'm a Pittsburgh boy. West Virginia is known for family gatherings and storytelling.
Yes.
It's a folk culture. It's a coal mine culture. But there are stories that have been passed from generation to generation, and the art of storytelling is really quite unique to the Appalachian area as a way of preserving, and I'm sure that its roots were in illiteracy and were in the lack of available education. You went to work as a kid. That was survival.
Right.
So storytelling and the art of storytelling was really, and still is today, a regional art that is quite fabulous.
You've nailed something. That I got an email yesterday. Jerry Jenkins has a writers guild, and one of the people that works with Jerry emailed me and said, what kind of advice would you give people that you would answer this question? If you could go back and tell yourself, as when you're first getting started writing, what would you say to yourself? And my answer immediately came to me, and that is, I would go back to when I was a child, sitting in my grandmother's house with my uncles at the table. And I'm getting a little emotional thinking about it, because it was there that the seeds of those stories were sown in my own soul, and I had no idea. And I would say to myself, soak this up. This is holy, what you're listening to with your uncles sharing their stories, with my mom and dad sharing their stories and my dad's gone, my mom will be 91 in February, with them sharing their stories of how they grew up, the hardscrabble life. My dad has told me that all 4 years of high school, and he was fortunate enough to stay in school, all 4 years of high school he wore the same shirt and the same pair of pants, and felt privileged to do that, in that little town. He also told me this story of when he was a kid, and he was I think it was in the first grade, and they lived in I can show you a picture of him and my uncle that I keep in front of my desk. He told me this story about when he was in the first grade. This is my dad and my uncle in the early 1920s in a coal camp. The teacher in first grade said, you can learn how to play a harmonica. And I don't know if it was the Honer Company or something along those lines, but if you'll bring a nickel, you'll get a harmonica and you'll get a little book and you'll learn how to play the harmonica. And he went home to his mother just so excited to buy a harmonica. Could I please, Mom, could I have a nickel? And they couldn't afford the nickel to get that harmonica. And so when my dad turned, 80 years old or something, I gave him a harmonica, and I told him to stop telling me that story because it made me cry every time.
Right.
But that's who he was. That's where they come from. Those are my roots, and I don't want to lose that.
In this book, Under a Cloudless Sky, this new novel that you've just released, it's a very targeted message to the aging population. My mother's 91, she'll be 92 in August.
Wow.
We have this certain amount of longevity. Things are changing. People are living longer, and we're having to face issues and questions and competencies and things that we don't seem to be prepared for, even though it is a reality. I just turned 66 a couple of days ago, and so I'm thinking, what about my long-term care? What am I going to be facing over the next possible 30 years? It was inconceivable when my father, he had a heart attack at 64,
Yes.
Was gone at 84, and was virtually sick from 64 to 84. I'm 100 years younger at 66 than he was at 64. The dynamic of life is changing. Do you find that you have been compelled to weave within your novels an underlying social or biblical message that is identifying or exposing or exploring a relevant social issue?
I think you could do that in two ways. One, you can write with an agenda and with, kind of a finger out there saying, please look at this. I've read those kinds of novels from really good writers, and I always feel like, I want a good story. I want to tell a good story. Now, if there are issues that are working in behind there, great, let's explore those, but I never want to have an agenda. And that even goes with the Christian message, the gospel, which I infuse all of my stories with because it's so important to me. But I don't want any reader to feel like I'm beating them over the head. I had an atheist, I wrote a book called Junebug, and it's about a little girl who rides around in an RV with her dad all over the country. And they break down one night in a Walmart parking lot in Colorado. And the little girl goes in and she looks up on the missing children pegboard and sees herself. And all of these questions come to her. That's the first page of the novel. The rest of the novel is, who am I? Who is he? Why am I here? What's going on? And so this atheist, who was the mom of one of the kids on my son's baseball team, Little League baseball team, she came up to me and she said, I'm not a Christian. I'm kind of antagonistic. I don't like Christian books and everything. But yours was different because it made me understand what you believe, but in a way that didn't bash me over the head. She was giving me a compliment about, I understand what you're talking about. I don't agree with you, but at least I understand. And I'm hoping that those kinds of things will happen with the new novel as well, not just with atheists, but with people who have parents who disagree with them about, some theological issue, or they feel like mom is just so set in her ways over here. The huge question that comes is, how do I love my mother, in the book, how do I love my mother who has been planted in this home for as long as she can remember and that I can remember, and she wants to stay there? How do I protect her and all the people in the community and the mailboxes as well? How do I do that and honor her and validate her and help her keep her dignity and not have me overstep my bounds? Because that's a huge issue. How do this question keeps coming back? How do I love well? And I think Jesus wants us to do that, but it's a struggle. It's hard.
Is this your story? Is this your story of you looking at your aging mom and having played over in your head, is it time to take the car keys? Is it time to get somebody to live with her? Is it time for her to get into some time of assisted living? Is this your own personal struggle, your personal challenges, or is this more of a commentary on a pressing social issue? And it's only pressing in America. I want to make this kind of distinction, because in what we consider to be other parts of the world, much more family-centric,
Yes.
many more generations living under the same roof. the concept of having an independent parent that's not surrounded by children and grandchildren and brothers and sisters and cousins and other relatives, which is very commonplace in many parts of the world, is uncommon in America, except for a particular region of America. Yeah. And that region happens to be the Appalachian region. And that still exists, that there are several buildings on a property, and each one of the families are building, and the next building to go up is because the next generation is getting married, and it's part of this family complex. This is a model from days gone by. It's an ancient European model, but it still exists today in a region of the world that you come from, region of the country you come from. Is that the better way? If we would have stuck to the nuclear family concept, would we be facing some of the issues we're facing today?
Those are really good questions. And the answer to your first question is yes, it's part of my story. It's part of what we've dealt with in the family. I have two older brothers and one that lives real close to her who has done most of this. You know, I'm in Arizona. I'm a couple thousand miles away from her, so I cannot be right there making these decisions. But my brother and his wife have been, and she's got some physical struggles that she's dealing with too, so that she has to have people come in and help her. But here's the dirty little secret of this whole thing. There are some people who have the personality of, oh, I'd like to get into a smaller place that's closer to my sons and daughters and have interaction with other people my same age, or live in a facility where I don't have to worry about getting up and down the stairs and doing all those types of things. My mother comes from that generation of hard scrabble. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to do it my way. My dad built the house that she still lives in 1961, I think it was. And he lived there all of his life. And they took him, I was there when they took him out on the gurney. And she said, this is where I've been. This is where I want to be. Now, how do you deal with that, with all of this encroaching, the physical situations? Sue Ann Camfield, in a book, I interviewed her not long ago about The Sound of a Million Dreams. And she had a friend who had a father who was 94, and the most logical thing to her was, I'm going to bring my 94-year-old dad and live with me, or live right next to me, that type of thing, with a parent house that's outside. And there was an 80-year-old doctor who came to Sue Ann's friend and said, there are three things that everyone needs, and I'll read this. There are three things every soul needs to survive: to be known, to have purpose, and to be remembered. The doctor contended that relocating a parent threatens all three of those. So the thing that we've had to kind of deal with in our family is, how do we let, first of all, the taking of the car keys, how do we let that be, we call her Mama, how do we let Mama make that decision herself as much as she can? How do we let her come to this herself? And how do we allow her to make her own choices that she wants to make? She wants to live there. If we pull her out of that, there's life that she has. I don't understand it. I fear for her falling, and we've taken some steps with, the thing that you wear. But I want to give her that as much as I can, because this is how she wants to live. So loving her well does not make her, you got to do this because I'm scared, because it's really hard to love when you're afraid. Loving her well means allowing her to make her own choices as long as we possibly can. And right now, she's doing that, and she's still feeding the cat out back that comes.
It's funny that you talk about interaction with aging parents. I left home early, went off to boarding school, and for over 50 years I've placed the same phone call on Sunday to my mother every Sunday for 50 years. Same time, same call. And so I reminded her this last Sunday. My birthday was Saturday, and I spoke to her on Saturday, but Sunday came, and the appointed time, and it's now it's in my DNA.
Yes.
And she said, you know, quite honestly, you've been bothering me for 50 years. I didn't realize that you've been harassing me every single week for 50 years. I think it's time for you to stop harassing your mother. And so it became a joke that I've been this faithful, loyal son because I've lived away. I haven't been back home in 50 years. I've always lived away and far enough away that going back and forth wouldn't be possible. So we have this standard. Now, this was my father's tradition when he left New York and left his Hungarian parents in New York to live with his sister. He made that same call to his mother every Sunday that I could remember as a child. And when my grandparents passed and when my father passed, there became this looking into things that we found out. First of all, that my father's name wasn't really his name. And the discussion was, what name do we put on his headstone? Since we now have found his papers, his name was not Herbert, it was Harry. What do we put on the headstone?
I got to write this down. This sounds like a novel to me.
and so there were secrets that began to come out. Some of the secrets were secrets you didn't want to continue, but some of the secrets were so fascinating that they took on stories and you began to make those inquiries. We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Chris Fabry, author of the new novel, Under a Cloudless Sky. This is a story which explores family dynamic, dealing with an aging parent, aging family member, and the care and the questions and the challenges, and really a deep, abiding relationship founded in love. And just a fabulous read, a captivating read. Chris Fabry, Under a Cloudless Sky. You can visit our website, ignitinganation.com. Scroll down to today's date and click on this book. It'll take you right to a link to get a copy for yourself. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The Teaching Archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're talking with Chris Fabry, best-selling author of War Room, and talking about his new novel, Under a Cloudless Sky. Chris, welcome back to the program.
It is great to be. I love the conversation. Thanks for leading us.
Thank you. You titled the book Under a Cloudless Sky. You had a reason. Everybody has a reason for why they title a book. What was your reason for calling this one Under a Cloudless Sky?
I am one of those old fuddy-duddies. I've become one of those old fuddy-duddies who believes that we are losing a lot by jettisoning hymns from our lives. I love, at some point, Martin Luther's A Mighty Fortress was a new song. So I'm not against it. Sing a new song to the Lord. But I think we are losing something by not singing those things that the generations that came before us also sang. And there was this, you talk about Appalachian, churches. There's a little white church I used to go to with the plinky piano. And we used to sing this song, Dwelling in Beulah Land. And it's a jaunty little tune, but it has a lot inside it about living in this, in a world that is full of fear and anxiety. And how am I going to get out of that? Well, dwelling in Beulah Land is this metaphor of spending time in God's Word and of feeding your soul from that that pool of clear, cool, life-giving water, the abundant life. And so I fashioned this, we started with the inciting incident of the older person who has her keys taken away because mama's going to kill somebody as she goes to the post office or the grocery store. The inciting incident is her daughter comes to her house the next day and grandma's gone. Mama's gone, and they don't know where she's gone. And so your job in the book as you read it is to figure out where has Ruby, here's her name, where's Ruby gone? And why did she leave? Other than she was just mad, maybe she's holed up in some hotel someplace and making her kids pay. But there is this thing that happened to her long, long ago, 70 years earlier, 1933, in a coal town in West Virginia called Beulah Mountain. And every Sunday, these two little girls from either sides of the track, as I came up with the story, they go jaunting through the hills to get to the church in time to be able to sing Beulah, dwelling in Beulah. And so that hymn kind of runs through the rocks and the trees and the hills and through the hollers, so that you understand who by the end of the book, you understand who Ruby really is, why she's gone, why she left. And this is the other thing that happens to me, Eric, on the radio. We'll talk about some hard thing. A lot of times it's molestation, or
Sure.
it's some event in the past, and I will have people call who are in their 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s, and they will reveal something about the past, and I'll say, who have you told that to? And not invariably, but almost every time they will say, this is the first time I've ever told anybody that. Because they had this connection with whatever the topic was, because it brought back that memory, because it brought back the pain and the struggle, and they just have to tell somebody that they trust. So I take that, as again, a holy thing, like the stories told in my childhood. This is a holy moment here when this person is trusting you enough with that information. What would have happened to her or him if they had told that secret 10 years earlier, or 20 or 30 or 40, rather than holding this in all of their lives? That's what Ruby has done with the secret of her life. And she thinks that, if she lets it out, it's going to kill her. And what she finds is that doesn't necessarily happen.
I'm listening to this story, and it's a combination of suspense. It's a mystery. It's what was that Angela Lansbury show that was on television?
Murder, She Wrote.
Murder, She Wrote. There you go. As it plays out, and you've got to follow the clues along. Now, you're published by a Christian publisher.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consider this to be Christian fiction? Or do you consider this to be crossover fiction?
I don't look, Christian fiction is where they have to shelve it so that at Barnes & Noble they can put it way in the back, someplace where you can't find it. And I'm not upset at Barnes & Noble if they keep my book anywhere near them. I'm grateful. But I think, we slap these labels on things. The novel Christie, you mentioned I won some Christie Awards. Is the book Christie, is that Christian fiction? Well, absolutely, because it deals with a character who's authentically motivated by her Christian faith. Why did that become a New York Times bestseller? Because it was a honking good story, because it pulled you in. And see, this is the thing that it always gets me. I feel like a good story is, I look back at the stories that have changed my life, that have fostered this desire to tell the stories. The very first one that I ever read that I recall doing this that way was To Kill a Mockingbird, which came out in the early 1960s, Pulitzer Prize, and everybody has seen the movie or read the book at least once. And what that book did was suspend your disbelief of being back there in Macomb, of being there, of seeing Tom Robinson in the jail, of seeing Atticus. You're with Scout, you're with Jim, you're looking down from the tree at Dill when he first makes his appearance. You're peeking in the window to see if you can see Boo Radley. A great story will bring you right along with it. And this is what I think of anything that I've done that's sold well. It's one of those stories that makes you travel well. And isn't that participation then? Isn't that participation exactly what God is doing through his word, through our life? He wants us to participate in this life, the Christian life. I was just reading this morning about Jesus when he called Peter. What did he do? He walks down by the shore, he gets in the boat, And then he says, let's go a little deeper here. Let's push out from the shore and go deeper. And he beckons Peter to go with him. And then when he's walking on the waves and Peter gets out and he sinks, what's he's we're right there with him. So the same thing that God is calling us to do, to have the abundant life, is to follow him, is to participate with him in this life, not just say a prayer, walk an aisle, get dunked somewhere, and then say, I'm good, I've got my insurance from hell. What he wants us to do is walk that. And so that's what I think a good story does. Label it Christian fiction or not, it draws you in, it makes you go along, it makes you guess at what's going to happen next, and it also asks the question, what would I do in this situation? If I'm Frances, Ruby's daughter, how would I handle this with the mother, with my brother, the way that he acts? All of that is mixed in there.
When you write your novels, what commitment, internal commitment, do you have to maintaining historical integrity, or to making sure that the setting is accurate? In my book, I went to Geneva and I walked the streets of Geneva, Switzerland, because it was the denouement, the rising action took place right there in Geneva, and I had to go there to be able to describe the width of the street and the relationship of the buildings, and it was a walking city, not a traveling city. Geneva is different than other cities, and I wanted to maintain the true integrity of the place so that it wasn't, even though it was fiction, it wasn't fictitious.
Yes. Yes. You have to get that, because in order to really immerse yourself in the story, I think it's incumbent on the writer to do that, to, in my story, to smell the coal dust, to hear the whistle of the train, the coal train that's coming through, to feel the grit between your teeth, to run barefoot, through those hills and hollers, to see that, there's no stoplights here. You got to be totally there in that scene. And because my parents lived it, and because I heard the stories growing up, in one sense, I didn't have to go there, because, I kind of, that's how I grew up. Right. Though it wasn't in the coal fields myself that I grew up. I knew that hard scrabble, hardwood floor existence that, creaked every time you walked it or walked up the stairs. The smell of the musty quilts that they brought from the old country over to here, that were in the trunk that Ruby has, where she has these old shoes. This is one of the metaphors that run through the novel, is the old shoes, and how important shoes were to people in that time. Because, if you didn't have shoes that covered your feet going into the mines or walking the streets, it was really rough. Smell of the horses, all of that. One of the movies that I love to watch is called Matewan. It's a John Sayles film, and it's about this battle in Matewan in almost to 1920, where there is a massacre that happens and the sheriff is involved, and they're very much involved is the churches in the town, and is the Union going to come in, and the scabs that are coming from another area. And as you watch that again, I'm immersed in that feel of what it was like to be there, and the helplessness of people who couldn't go take their money and drive and go someplace else to buy something. You got to shop at the company store. And that's why Ruby, the main character, is her dad owns the company store, and her friend Bean is, her dad's a miner, and so she's from the other side of the tracks, and you see this coalescing, these two friends that come together who shouldn't be together, and her dad wants to keep her away from this rabble that's out there. And you see those two people getting together and becoming friends that can't be separated. So that's a long way to answer your question, that yes, it has to be authentic, but you have to walk the line of getting too far into the details so that you're outside the fictive dream, that you don't want to give them, you don't want to overload them too much with the details of that they forget where they are and what the story really is about. And so I try to walk that line.
Chris, it's been my experience as I've traveled around and preached in churches all over, from mega churches to small country churches, that the more impoverished the community, the deeper, the greater, the more abiding the faith, the more exuberant the praise and worship, the more committed, the more wear my Sunday best, wear my fancy hat, wear my come, because I lived the worst of it for the 10,000 minutes that I'm in the world. Here I am in the 80 minutes. I think Tim Timmons has put this together, that we spent 80 minutes in church and 10,000 minutes outside. But those 80 minutes in the inner city, in the rural areas, I find so much deeper, more abiding faith, seeming like the less you have, the more faith you get.
That can be true, but it's also true on the flip side of that church or faith becomes a social event that you don't really participate in. You kind of show up and you go through. So that can happen as well. But I'll answer that by saying, when have you grown the most in your life? When have you felt the most close to God in your life? For me, it hasn't been when everything's been going my way, when I get awards, when I make a lot of money, or anything like that. Success as the world defines it. When I have been the most spiritually connected to God is when I have had to depend on Him like never before. And I think that's what you're talking about. When you have this, I can't do this on my own. I can't pull myself up by my bootstraps. And that's in a lot of ways what happens in Appalachia. It's, you get out there and you work, and if you can't make it, you work a little harder. And if you can't make it, then you go even harder. You do it yourself. And when you come to the end of yourself like that, then you realize this is not about me working harder. This is about God, coming in and helping me, which gets me to the spiritual part of the gospel that I love to get to. And that is, faith in Christ. A lot of people will say, you Christians believe you're better than everybody else. No, we believe that we are sinners and there's no hope for us outside of the sacrifice that was given for us. So when I'm in Christ, then I have this wellspring of life that I can tap into, whether things are going good or bad. And God is going to cover me with the blood of His Son so that I have salvation, and then He works in me to conform me to the image of Christ as I draw close to Him. That's what it's about. It's not about me being better or finding fault with somebody else. It's about God saying, you can't do this on your own. I'll do it for you. It's a gift from me to you. That's what grace is all about.
Have you found that things like exposing the abuses that women suffered in mining camps, some social injustice, has been an underlying key or theme in each one of the novels you've written, that you've been able to identify particular areas that maybe we're not so aware of? It's more as transformational as the text is, it also becomes somewhat informational and kind of makes me want to look into what happened, things that were hidden. They didn't make the front pages. These were abuses that were going on that were hushed.
Yes. Yeah, and that's what one of the things in this novel is, what part of the secret that Ruby has is what happened on the third floor of the company store where they sold shoes, and when you would see a woman wearing new shoes, you knew something had transpired between them. a lot of times it's not a social thing, it's more a personal thing. I wrote a novel called Not in the Heart, and it's my most despicable character I've ever written about. His name is Truman Wiley, and he has a gambling addiction, and not an addiction to alcohol, but it's mixed in there. And the whole story really is about his wife, who is a Christian, and Truman, who's not. His addictions, her love for him, how far will she go to love him well with the way that he is treating her and treating the family, the things that he can't control seemingly. And so opening kind of that can of worms with her and her love for him and his continual battle, the internal battle of having this, he's a journalist, having this sense of justice and uncovering the truth when he really came in and uncovered the truth about his own life. That's what he comes up against. So I find that's very compelling because, go back to Kill a Mockingbird, when you see what happens to Tom and Mayella Ewell, she's another, a person who's on the stand who is in the same kind of situation that Tom is in, but in a different way. You have this feeling of just, it rises up. It's not right. It's the same thing that rose up in David when he heard that story. It's like, this is not right. And if you tap into that, of course you can use it to manipulate, but if you tap into that sense of justice that we all have, then you're going to get to a good place because our God is a God of justice. He's a God of mercy. He's a holy God, though, and so justice is a huge part of him. And aren't you glad that he has that characteristic?
The timing of the book and several of the underlying themes of the book. You've got the Harvey Weinstein situation, and that's the third floor of the company store. You've got this aging parents and aging America, which is causing us to have to look at elder care. On the other side of elder care is elder abuse. Yes. And families not planning well or having those conversations which are difficult to have about what do we do about mom? How do we approach mom? This is not a drug intervention. This is our mother, and yes. And the respect and the admiration. And how do you tell her that we don't think your children, that you didn't think we could when we couldn't do anything, you did it all for us, and now yes. It's completely flipped, and now we're coming to you and saying, you can't take care of yourself, we need to take care of you. This is the timing of it from a social justice, from a social import standpoint is impeccable. This could only be based on the quickening of the Holy Spirit for this to be released at this time, and knowing that this book was not written, it wasn't written timed to the release of the Harvey Weinstein story.
Right. Yeah, no, and it, like you say, when it comes from the heart, when it comes from reality that you're struggling with, then all of these things will fit together, and I hope it will help one person who is walking through some of that and will take them to some really good places, because this is, navigating those waters is really, really hard. And I found it, in our family with my mother, having what we called a mama whisperer. There's usually some person in the family or some person in the extended family, or maybe even a really trusted friend or confidant who can come alongside when, their anger comes up. You think I can't do this, and I'm just, I'm never going to fill in the blank. There's some person who can come alongside and just say, your kids love you so much, and they're afraid, they're scared. Have you ever been scared like that about your kids when they were teenagers and they went off in the car? Well, yeah, of course you do. That's how they feel about you. Well, I'm okay. A lot of these conversations came directly from conversations that I had with my mom,
right? Because
she was so, you're not going to do this. You're not going to tell me what to do. If she knows this comes from a heart of love, and the whisperer can come alongside her and explain this, then you're more apt to get to a good place with her and have this be her own idea or his own idea. I think there's a whole other, level of this when you get to the man, to the dad who's doing that, because so much of that identity is wrapped in the I can do this, I can provide, and you don't want to take their dignity away. You want to give them that freedom and that independence that they have worked a long time to get. But at the same time, it's true. If they're banging down the mailboxes in the neighborhood, something bad's going to happen, and they don't want to, hit a child on a bike without being able to see them. So you got to deal with reality. We got to deal with what is, and what is the situation that's in front of us.
Right. Chris, we've got about 2 minutes left in this segment. I'm going to ask your opinion on something.
All right.
The church in the mission field has focused on Central America, various countries to go help rebuild, build on to do their mission, quote unquote, what we define as the mission trip, the annual mission trip or 2 annual mission trips. Is it time for the church to shift focus as we have this aging population, to start to look at some programs within the church? Because it was at one time the local parish that was the one that made sure that meals and that somebody was looking after, and there was somebody to sit, and there was caregiving, and there was somebody who was the checkpoint, and they had kind of assignments. And we've moved away from that in several different ways. Do you think we need to kind of fine-tune a little bit?
I don't think it has to be either or, and I love your question. We're really close to the border here, so there are churches that I've been involved with near Tucson which have gone over the border and done relief and evangelization and build schools and build homes and things like that. And I would hate for that to stop.
Right.
Because, so I think you can I would hope that what you're talking about with our aging population is something that goes on every week, every day, with people who are deacons, with those who see these needs in the community within the population. And there's one of the problems, I think, just getting this communicated to the right people so that they know what's going on. And a lot of times there's pride with the older generation that, well, I don't, I'm not like those other people and I don't need the help.
Right.
Well, yeah, you do. And so be open about that, communicate that, and then allow the church to come alongside.
Well, I think it's a very helpful message. It's a helpful message contained in here about how to convey, how to talk about these difficult subjects, presented in a beautiful story, Under a Cloudless Sky, by Chris Fabry, best-selling author of War Room, his new novel, Under a Cloudless Sky. Chris, it's been just an honor and a privilege to have you on the program. We thank you for what you do. We thank you for who you are, and we thank you for the great works that you've been providing for us. Thank you for being here on Revealing the Truth.
It's been my privilege, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.